Yeah, we can just reward those that are showing up early and
Yep.
chat a little bit.
Recording in progress.
Okay. So now I need to
Turn off your speaker and mic over there on your laptop, or your iPad. Hello, everyone who's joined early. We're going to get started right on time, but we thought we'd let some people in and say good morning, make sure everything's working technology-wise. We'll do some formal intros here in a minute, but hope everyone's having a great Wednesday. Today's Wednesday, March 30th. We're almost at a close of the first quarter of 2022. Mind blowing.
I don't believe you. That can't be right.
Yeah, don't believe me. There's only one day left. So.
Still have another day to wrap my head around that.
That's right. Yeah, and the three people you see on camera, we're all in different states in the United States. I'm in Utah.
I'm in Phoenix.
And I'm in Idaho.
Yeah.
And as of just a little while ago, we're now in different time zones.
That's true.
Hi,
Cindy's chiming in from Springfield, Missouri. That's awesome. If others want to let us know where you're tuning in from, that'd be great. It'd be fun to see. Sorry, Corey, I interrupted you.
I was going to say the same thing. You read my mind.
Hey, we have another Utah. All right, go Utah. Go Canada.
Okay.
We had some rain here this morning in Utah.
We had rain yesterday, which was very unusual for us. We had almost 1/4 of an inch where we generally the average rainfall in the valley here is about 6-7 inches a year. When I was living in the Midwest, the average rainfall was like 50 inches a year.
Yeah. That's great. We need more. Anytime you're in a desert like Arizona or Utah, we can take all the moisture we can get.
Yep, that's true.
Yep.
Plus, it makes everything smell so clean.
Mm-hmm. Katie, I love that you're from Scranton. Any other Office fans? I saw that and was immediately drawn to it.
We'll see if Katie does the eye roll or not. Oh, God.
Yeah, if she likes the Office comment or not. All right.
I'm going to pause just for a second because it's 10 o'clock. Just as we shoot the recording, we're not going to include all this chatter in the recording. So just give it a few seconds. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We are really excited. Corey and I are especially excited because we get to sit back and learn just like the rest of you. We have no pressure, which is great for these mobile coach webinars. We are so delighted to have Bob with us today. I'll be introducing him in a minute. But I first want to introduce myself. My name is Vince Hahn. I'm the founder and CEO of Mobile Coach. We're sponsoring today's webinar. Thrilled to be here. And as we were just chit-chatting before, I'm located in Provo, Utah. And I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Corey. I'll let her introduce herself, and she's also going to do some housekeeping for us.
Yes, thank you, Vince. Hi, everyone. I'm Corey Richards. And today I just have a couple of housekeeping notes before we can get started, and also a dog in my background. So sorry about that nose. So first, Bob has a handout that is included in the calendar invite. So if you want to reference the handout during the presentation, you can find that in your calendar invite. Also, we are recording this, so we're going to send the recording to everyone later today. So if you need to drop off at any time, don't worry, you'll still get the full recording. And finally, we want to have a very engaged chat. So please, you'll notice that your chat function defaults to panelists. If you'll just change that to everyone, and feel free to add any comments or things you'd like to add to the presentation there so we can all learn from each other. And I'll be keeping track of questions. So if you want to put questions in the chat at any time, I'll keep track of them and then just let Bob know when he has a moment to answer those questions. I'll let him know what your questions were. So that's it. That's our housekeeping.
All right, good job, Corey, with the housekeeping. If anyone has any questions or technical issues, please chime in the chat, and we'll be Corey and I will be monitoring that. So now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Bob Pike. Bob has long been known as the trainer's trainer. He has presented at every ATD and training magazine conference since 1977. It's just amazing. He's the author of more than 35 books, including the all-time best-selling Train the Trainer book, Master Trainer's Handbook. So more than 180,000 trainers on 5 continents are graduates of his multi-day Train the Trainer programs. I'm looking forward to the day where Bob ticks off Antarctica and gets that 6th continent. That was a dad joke. I can't help myself. But anyway, Bob, we're so delighted to have you with us. And so welcome and thank you.
Well, it's good to be here. I'm very excited to share. And let me reinforce 2 things that Corey said. Number 1 is please be sure to download the handout. The handout is a very important part of the presentation. And I'm kind of curious, if you've heard me present before, and it could have been another webinar, it could be live, would you just type in the chat box where it is that you've seen me? And okay, Chicago, okay, online webinars, Orlando, okay, Atlanta. Oh, Walt, okay, yeah, okay, you've seen me a lot of places. Okay, great, wow, all the way back to 1993. All right, so the interesting thing is, I always tell people is that no one is as famous as they think they are, and so I always like to do a little bit in advance to kind of get an idea. So let me go ahead and show you the PowerPoint that I'm going to be using today. And I'm just going to share the screen here. And so you can see it says, tough times never last, prepared L&D professionals do. And one of the things that I found is that the last couple of years has turned everything upside down. And some people responded to it very well and they adapted, and others did not. And so I just want to look at what are the strategies, and the strategy that will work all the time is for us to add value and make a difference. Good times, bad times, up markets, down markets, pandemic, whatever. If you're adding value and making a difference, you're going to be in good shape. And so let me suggest that the thing that's probably most important for us in all of this is focus and clarity. And this is not on your handout. I added this last night as I was preparing. Focus says, what am I paying attention to? Because today there is so much that is just grabbing for our attention. Average person is exposed to 16,000 commercials a day. And you say, well, how can I do that? I don't even watch TV. As you're driving down the road, you're unaware of how many signs you pass. And all of these are advertisements, or as we scan online. So what am I deliberately paying attention to? And then secondly, how well do I understand it? So focus and clarity. And so the one thing that I want us to understand is that adversity either makes us stronger. So the pandemic, everything that's going on, even everything going on with Ukraine right now, we can either get stronger or we can let it be weaker. It's kind of like as we hit a problem, if you look at it as a wedge, we either let that wedge drive us upward so we get stronger, or we let it drive us downward. And I want you to remember we have the power of choice, and that's going to be important later in the presentation. So let me give you my strategies. And strategy number one is that we need a paradigm shift. We need a paradigm shift. And what I mean by that is, for too long, companies and individuals have operated on what I call the have, do, be paradigm. If only I had, then I'd be able to do, which would allow me to have. But I don't. But I don't have. And so for example, if only I had a boat, it would allow me to take the kids out on the weekends, and I could get away from video games, and that would cause me to be a great dad, but I don't have a boat. So we need to switch paradigms to the be, do, have paradigm. And the be, do, have paradigm basically says, when I become, it will allow me to do, and that will allow me to have. So it's the be, do, have, and that's critical for me. And one of the reasons that I think that this is so important is that have, do, be is externally focused. So other people are responsible for whether we succeed or fail. I'm amazed at the number of people that are constantly arguing over nurture or nature. And I don't think that it's either or. I think that it's both and. But I can tell you that, I was raised with 5 brothers and sisters, and 2 of us turned out relatively well in terms of mental health and everything else. And the other 4 have spent their entire lives up until the point where 2 of them have passed away, constantly having problems, and very often blaming our mother and father for why they had problems. Well, we had the same parents, so we had the same environment. So be, do, have is internally focused. I am responsible for whether I succeed or fail. Personal responsibility. And a friend of mine, Rich Meese, said, we've got the Statue of Liberty in New York. And what we ought to have in the San Francisco harbor is the statue of personal responsibility. Because with liberty and with freedom comes responsibility. And I think that's a pretty good idea. So what would it mean if our companies were filled with people who accepted personal responsibility, made commitments and kept them, were good listeners, set goals and achieved them, and who managed their emotions? And we saw a recent example of that, didn't we, a couple of nights ago? I'd be very surprised if almost everybody on the webinar today doesn't know what I'm referring to. So strategy number 2, clarify your values. What's important to you? So what I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to write down the 3 things that are most important to you in life. And as soon as you've written those down, I'd like you to stand up. Now, I know that I can't see you. We don't have you on gallery, but I'd like you to stand up. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to write down the 3 things that you value the most. What's important to you? And then as soon as you're done, you can, and stood up, you can be seated and just type done in the chat box. Okay, great. Lots of dones. Okay, so here's my question. In our Western culture, we tend to determine value by two things: how we tend to spend our time, how we spend our money. So if I could magically have access to a calendar showing how you spent every moment of last year, and a spreadsheet that showed every penny you spent the last year, by looking at that, would I see that the things that you wrote down were actually the things that you value? You know, so I say, well, I really value my church and I want to support it. And you look and you say, Bob, you gave $2 a week. And I'll go, yeah, isn't that great? And you went to church twice. Yeah, isn't that great? Easter and Christmas. I really value my church. Well, you know, a lot of people would argue that, you know, Bob, that really doesn't show that you value your faith if you only show up 2 times a year and if you only give $2 every time you go. Is there enough evidence to convict you? And you know, I have a confession. For a lot of years, I was a workaholic, and I traveled 250 something days a year. And today my kids would say that they were always well provided for, but they would trade a lot of that well provided for time with me that I never spent with them. And so this hits home with me, and I don't want you to think that, oh, Bob's just saying that because he's this perfect person. I'm not. I'm a work in progress, and I've made a lot of mistakes in the past that I'm working to overcome. So clarify your values. So here's the iceberg model of human behavior. So all of us know that the iceberg has about 1/3 visible and 2/3 that's not visible. And so above the waterline, you see behavior. At the waterline, you have choices. And our choices are driven by emotions, attitudes, values, belief. But at the bottom of it, we have how we think. How we think does make a difference. We can choose our thoughts. And an attitude is a habit of thought and a way of thinking. So my suggestion is work on your attitude. And the question I would ask is your attitude positive or negative? And how do you know? Because we confuse doubt with caution, fear with realism, and criticism with evaluation. So it's not that I have any doubts about this project, but I think we should proceed cautiously. I move that we appoint a committee to gather facts, get information, oscillate, vacillate, procrastinate. If we take long enough, the committee won't have to make a decision. If we have to make a decision, it turns out we're right, the committee can grab off the credit. And if we're wrong, we've got a lot of people we can blame. So doubt, which is negative, disguises itself as caution, which is positive. Or fear with realism. And I see this, I do a lot of sales meetings, and you'll go around the room and the salespeople are setting their goals and they're going to shoot for the moon and aim for the stars. And until you get to this one guy who goes, you know, all these goals I hear are great, but I'm going to be realistic. And what this person is saying is I am so afraid of failure. I'm going to set a goal so low that if I do nothing, I can achieve it. You know, well, who gets excited over watching somebody high jump 3 feet? Most of us can fall over 3 feet. But the fear of failure disguises itself as I'm being realistic. And then finally, criticism with evaluation. Now, Vince, I don't want you to think that I'm criticizing, but I would like to evaluate your rotten performance. And so criticism, which is negative, disguises itself as evaluation, which is positive. And so we need to think about, what am I doing to get my attitude straight? And let me tell you that I have used for probably the last 50 years what I call the 3 V's. I verbalize, I visualize, I vitalize. So verbalize says I use positive affirmations. And I'm a follower of Christ. So I say things like, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. I was a salesperson. What's behind the door? I know not. This I know it well. The more I knock, the more I sell. I am a master trainer, and I can honestly say that today, but when I first started out, I wasn't a master trainer, but that was an affirmation. I'm in the process of becoming a master trainer. So I verbalized. Then secondly, I visualized. I mentally rehearsed everything that I was going to do before I did it. Then finally vitalized. I actually did it in real life. So that's so let's go to strategy 3, become a participant-centered presenter. And learn and use the power of closers, openers, revisitors, and energizers. Most trainers don't close, they just run out of time. And they don't open, they just start dumping content. And they don't revisit. And revisit is so important because we know that we have to revisit key content 6 times before we can move it from short-term memory to long-term memory. And finally, energize. There are times during any training program when people lose energy. What do we do to get that energy back up? Now, here's something that I want to do just quickly. In the chat box, type what does CORE stand for, and don't hit enter until I tell you to. So I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. Write down, what does CORE stand for? And don't type enter until I tell you to. Now, some of you are going to get this because you've got notes. Some of you are going to get this because you remember. Some of you aren't going to remember, but there will be a learning point here. All right, go. Okay, a lot of them, closers, openers, revisit, energize, closers, openers, revisit, energize. So notice, first of all, that I gave you a memory device, the core of learning. And I don't have a lot of time in the 60 minutes to go into this. So I've got something for you. If you will send an email to book@cttnewsletters.com with the subject line TMN Power, and then a sentence about what you learned today, I'm going to send you a copy, an ebook copy of my book, Unlock Learning, Unleash Performance, and it will drill down on a lot of the strategies we're talking about today that we don't have time to expand on. And so I really want to make sure that you get the book at cttnewsletters.com. Subject line TMN Power. Okay, strategy 4, understand the purpose of training. The purpose of training is to get results. It's not about developing people. It's not about empowering, inspiring, equipping people, although all of those lead to getting results. But the ultimate purpose is to get results. And my belief is that participants should leave impressed with themselves, not intimidated by the instructor, excited about what they now know that they didn't know before, what they can now do that they couldn't do before, with more confidence in themselves, And I did a training program one time up in Toronto, and one of my trainers and I co-led it. It was a 5-day program. It was certification. They had to demonstrate competence. And on Friday, as we finished and people were leaving, I had somebody come up to me and they shook my hand and they said, "Bob, I didn't see you do anything I can't do." And I said, "Well, thank you very much." And they left him. And then my trainer said to me, "Bob, what an insult." And I go, "What do you mean, what an insult?" And they said, "It's taken you years to develop all of this. And, they think after 5 days." And I said, that wasn't an insult. That was a compliment. He's basically saying that you and I modeled in such a way, and we gave them practice in such a way that they're leaving with the confidence that they can do what they've seen done because we gave them the chance to do it. And I took it as a compliment. He wasn't intimidated by me. And I think that that's something that we really need to keep in mind. Now, one of the things that I really think is important is the whole idea of follow-up and reinforcement. And I talk to people a lot about the missing link in instructional systems design, and that missing link is transfer. And a lot of times we just don't do a good job of transfer. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm excited about Mobile Coach. And so I want to introduce the BobBot, powered by Mobile Coach. And it's a 30-day we're going to use to continue to have me connect and reinforce everything you've learned. And you can get started with it by texting 205-306-3375. And the subject line, put MC Power. Or if you're on MS Teams, you can use this link. And so Vince, I'd like you to go live again and just share with us a little bit about Mobile Coach. I've been using it about 5 or 6 years now, and I'm very excited about it, and I'm always glad to partner with you. So Vince, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, we've been very excited to work with you, particularly because the content that you offer is so rich. And you mentioned transfer. It's a really common use case of our platform for people to use our platform for learning transfer. What Mobile Coach does is that we're an authoring tool for chatbots. And the reason why chatbots are interesting is because they're very frictionless. And hopefully you'll feel that if you try out BobBot. You don't have to download software. There's no username and password. It's a very conversational user experience. And so having that frictionless user experience, it adds a lot of value to organizations who are fighting for engagement because email gets buried and there's just very few channels to really effectively reach people. Because it's frictionless, chatbots also allow people to engage over content over time. And time is a very important function of transfer. We have our short-term memories, we have our long-term memories, and we need that sort of reinforced cadence over time. I think that's one reason why microlearning is very popular and spaced learning is very popular as well. And chatbots can do that. So the Mobile Coach platform basically is having learning and development professionals step back and think, okay, if I can create this conversation over 30 days, over 60 days, or even over a year, how can we build that conversation to really drive learning transfer or new hire onboarding or influence behavior change? So that's a little bit about what we do, and we've loved partnering with Bob because your learners at the end of the day aren't really going to be interested in what the techie or like what's the technology powering this message. They're going to be interested in the content. And so to the extent you can get great valuable content in a frictionless way to learners, I think is a really valuable user experience, which is why we love partnering with Bob. So please try this out. You can either use SMS or Microsoft Teams. And if you're interested in this type of thing, we do host these introductions to chatbots for learning. And Corey will put a link to more information about those workshops that you can sign up for. So thanks for a few minutes, Bob, but we've really enjoyed making BobBot too. It's kind of a fun name as well. So, yeah, thanks.
Oh, great. Thanks. And so here's another thing that I want to do right now. A lot of times people wait until the end to do Q&A, and we have a couple of strategies left. But right now, what I'd like to do is silence my phone. So if you forgot to silence yours now, a good time to do that. Right now, if you've got a question you'd like to ask me about anything we've covered, what we're going to do is we're going to take about 8 or 9 minutes for Q&A. So if you've got a question, if you would type it in the chat box, and Corey, if you would kind of look through those and share with me the ones that you'd like me to answer. We'll answer at least 3 or 4 of them. So if you've got a question you'd like to ask me about anything we've touched on, go ahead and put it in the chat box. And Corey, if you would select some and give them to me, I would appreciate it.
Yes, it looks like we haven't gotten any questions yet. So if you're typing and you want to submit a question, go ahead and do that. Okay, so first question, Adrian would like to ask, how have you integrated microlearning besides using the chatbot? So Bob, are there any other techniques that you've used with microlearning?
Yes, I also use an application called umu.com. And that's one that allows me to build small courses that can be accessed by a smartphone. And it allows me to deliver content and ask questions and have them answer questions and do polls and those kinds of things. And as a matter of fact, right now I'm working on a new book on blended learning that'll probably be in Japanese before it's in English. So that's another application that I found useful during the class, and then BobBot is a great thing to use after the class. So thanks for that question, Adrian.
And Bob, that's UMU. Is that UMU? Can you just spell that for people?
Yes, it's umu.com. umu.com.
I've got a question, Bob. I have the advantage of being able to unmute myself while we wait. To become a participant-centered presenter, is there a big difference doing that in person versus over virtual?
Well, probably the biggest difference is, so I have a thing that I use called 90-28. Adults can listen with understanding for 90 minutes. They listen with retention for 20 minutes. We need to involve them every 8 minutes. Now that 8 minutes is if I'm face-to-face with them, and that's because of the impact of television. Commercial television doesn't go more than 8 minutes without a break. And people have thousands and thousands of hours of being exposed to television, which never makes them focus for more than 8 minutes. With virtual learning, I changed that to 4 because I don't have eye contact with everybody. I can't just glance around the room. If it's a larger class, then we're probably not even going to use gallery. But what I found with virtual is the closer we can make it to face-to-face. So if we had a smaller group, we would, in a little bit longer time, we would be using breakout groups. And because we're using Zoom, people would be allowed to both see and talk to each other. So one of the benefits of greater bandwidth today is that we can use that. Another thing that shifts is that my average group size face-to-face would be 5 to 7, but when I'm using chats, breakout rooms on a webinar, it's going to be 3 people. And the one reason is that it's a little bit more difficult for people to get started. And if you've got 5 people, you have people worried about talking over one another and that kind of thing, because the visual cues aren't as big. And so we then reduce that to 3. But the closer you can make virtual learning like face-to-face, the more effective it's going to be. Now, of course, that's assuming that your face-to-face is effective. And of course, if you're using my results-based creative learning strategies, it's going to be effective. So I appreciate the question. Corey, do we have any other questions?
Yes, we do have one other question.
Okay.
So Kate asks, is the concept behind the chatbot reinforcing little things on a daily basis to reinforce practice?
It's actually a combination of things. So sometimes it's a question that you'll answer and the chat bot will give you feedback about whether or not that was correct, or it'll remediate. Sometimes it'll be something to accomplish. Sometimes it'll be a reminder. So it's actually a variety of things that happen over 30 days to re-engage you in the content. And so it doesn't become a cookie cutter where you're expecting that every 2 days I'm going to get an SMS and it's going to tell me to do some version of the same thing over and over again. There's a lot of variety to it.
Thank you, Bob. And we just have one last question.
Okay.
Leslie asks, how can you make required training more palatable to the end user?
Well, first of all, I tell people everybody is tuned to 2 radio stations. The first is WIIFM, What's in it for me? And if it's required training, the question is, why is it required? Is it required because there are some regulations that we have to satisfy, et cetera? And probably the worst group to do required training with is healthcare workers with CPR. And yet the average healthcare worker doesn't have to use CPR, but every couple of years they have to be recertified. And so a lot of times they'll come in, especially the people that I've worked with at Red Cross that are instructors, and and it's like, I already know all of this stuff. And so one of the things that that we came up with is let's start with how much you do know. And it's amazing how much they have forgotten. So then suddenly they see the remediation, the going over it again, because let's face it, CPR is something you hope you're never going to need to use. But if you ever do, you're going to be grateful, because frankly, you're probably going to have to use it on somebody that you love or somebody that you know very well. And so I think that's the biggest key is why is this important? And I also think that we can look at, how am I going to deliver the content? Because if it's something that's required, but they already know, or they're already familiar with, then maybe there's a different way that we can deliver it that kind of acknowledges their knowledge. So for example, you might give people 18 guidelines and say, I want you to get a partner, rewrite these guidelines and make 5 of them wrong. And now you pass the paper on to somebody else and they have to figure out what the correct guidelines are. And so now you're letting people break things, which they love. And they also get to fix things. And so that's a way to cover content that they already know, or they think they already should know. But by partnering with another person, you're ensuring that they're reinforcing the correct information. So that would be a suggestion I would have for that.
Okay, great. And actually, Bob, we have one more question if we have time for it.
Okay.
Elizabeth asked, how do you measure whether integrated micro-learning efforts are working or not?
Well, I think it's the same way we measure anything, and that's that if you're talking about knowledge, then you pre and post test. Anytime you want to test people, if you haven't pre-tested them, then the test is worthless, because you're kind of assuming that everything they did learn, they learned as a result of your training. So I would suggest demonstration, pre and post test, those kinds of things. But also, if you're looking at level 3, did they use it? Then you start getting some anecdotal evidence from their managers about what are they actually using on the job. But I also think that that's a good place where the chatbot comes in, because 14 days from now, I could ask a question about have you had a chance to use this? Yes, no. And if the answer is yes, then give me a sentence or two about what the results have been. And if the answer is no, hey, let me encourage you today, take the time to practice this, because it was an important part of the training.
Thank you so much for those answers, Bob. I think that's it for the questions now.
Okay, great. All right, here's strategy 6, allow reflection time. And so right now, what I'd like you to do is take a minute and you have some blank space on your paper, on your handout all the way at the end where it says notes. But I'd like you right now to just reflect on what are 1 or 2 things you're going to do differently because of the time we've spent together so far. Now, while you're writing, I want you to notice that for the most part, I just do silence. And sometimes when people are doing virtual training, they're just afraid of silence. And giving people time to think is a good use of online time. So now what I'd like you to do is write in the chat box 1 of your action ideas. And then I want you to look at the other ideas that you see coming up in the chat box. And if you see an idea you like, add it as your own. Okay, would you type 1 of your action ideas in the chat box? And as they come up, if Corey, if you could read them, and you can avoid any duplications.
Yes. Okay, so we have incorporating be, do, have into my 2022 goals. I love that idea. Then we have pre-test and post-test. Let learners know why training is required. Use pre-evaluation, so measurement. Revisit more. We have a lot of core. People are really loving the core.
Okay, great.
And then evaluate my top 3 values and align with behavior. Okay,
fantastic. So now you might have noticed, if you've got the handout, that I didn't touch on strategy 5, my top 10 lessons. And one of the reasons that I didn't is that if you send the email to book@cttnewsletters.com, you're actually going to get about 20 pages that drills down on those top 10 strategies. But these are strategies that make training, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, far more interactive. And so let's go to the final one. Oh, no, here are 4 things I'm doing right now for me to be more strategic. Renewing connections and seeing what I can do to help people. I started this during the pandemic. It continues now. Converting more of my content from face-to-face to virtual, improving my virtual presentation skills, and then digging deeper and focusing on solving problems rather than delivering events. Because again, when I solve problems, I'm adding value and I'm making a difference. Okay, so my final strategy, become an army of one. Never underestimate the power of a single person. So I want to tell you a couple of stories. So during the Civil War, a young man who was 11 years old volunteered for the Union Army. And at that time, the legal age was 15. And so somehow he found himself assigned in battle to a captain named Captain Conwell. And Conwell realized this is a boy. I mean, 15. Now we wouldn't even consider 15 a man, and let alone want to send them to war. But here was Johnny Ring, and because they were in the battle lines, he couldn't send him anywhere. So what he did is he made Johnny Ring his sword bearer, because a captain's dress sword never went into battle. But they also found other things for Johnny to do, so he became part of the group, part of the company. So he was valued, he was liked. And one day, as the battle wound down, they retreated across this pine tar covered bridge, set up camp, not realizing the battle lines had shifted during the day and they were now behind Confederate lines. So just at dusk, the Confederates attacked. The entire company went across the bridge, and they lit the bridge on fire to keep the Confederates from following them. And as they got to the other side, Johnny Ring realizes, I've left my captain's sword in his tent. So he races across the bridge, gets the sword, he gets back to the bridge, it's engulfed in flame. I mean, you can hardly get within 10 feet of it. The battle stops. The Confederates urged Johnny to surrender, that he'll be well treated, no harm will come to him. His Union compatriots urge him to do the same thing. His captain orders him to surrender. But Johnny Ring ducks his head and races through 90 feet of flame to the captain. And as he gets to the captain, he's 70% of his body is covered with 3rd and 4th degree burns. And as he lies dying in Conwell's arms, Conwell said, "Why did you do this? Why did you not obey my command?" And he said, "I go to Jesus knowing that I have fulfilled my commitment to you." And he died. Now, 50 years later, Conwell is being interviewed by the Philadelphia Inquirer. And they said, "Dr. Conwell, how have you managed to accomplish everything you have in your lifetime? You've built the largest law firm in Philadelphia. You founded Temple University. You founded Temple Hospital. You've been the lead minister at Temple Baptist Church for years. You've given a speech called Acres of Diamonds to millions of people and raised tens of millions of dollars. How have you managed to do this in your lifetime?" And Russell Conwell told the story of Johnny Ring, and he said, "As Johnny lay there dying in my arms, I was an atheist, but I made a vow to God right then that from that day forward, I would live 8 hours a day for Johnny Ring, and to give the world the life they should have had in him, and 8 hours a day for Russell Conwell. And Johnny Ring's life has been far more rewarding than mine." Here's one insignificant boy who made an impact on one insignificant Union Army captain who made an impact on millions. It's the power of one. Now we fast forward about 20 years. And here's a nurse who is getting ready to retire. She works in a Boston insane asylum. And in an insane asylum, the very worst cases, they simply put in clean cages downstairs. And the nurse got in the habit of sitting next to this cage. There's a little 8-year-old girl named Little Annie in this cage, and she was catatonic. So the nurse talked to her day after day, never any response. And she did that for several months. Well, one day she was called away, and when she came back, she realized that Little Annie had taken what was left of her lunch, and she realized Little Annie is not catatonic. And so she persuaded the administrators to bring her upstairs. They rehabilitated her. And now 50 years later, a woman is standing before the Queen of England, receiving the highest honor that England can bestow on a non-English citizen. And as the Queen was doing it, she said, "You've accomplished so much in your lifetime. You're blind, but you've written best-selling books that have raised millions for charity. You're deaf, but you've given speeches that have raised millions for charity. How have you managed to do all of this with your handicaps, Helen Keller?" And Helen Keller said, I couldn't have done it if it weren't for my teacher, Ann Sullivan, who 50 years earlier had been known as Little Annie. Now here's a nurse who paid attention to what we would assume is an insignificant girl, who made an impact on a blind and deaf woman, who made an impact on millions. That's the power of one. And as trainers and as presenters, we don't know who's in our audience. We don't know what we could do or say that would have an impact on just one person that could change their lives, that could turn it around, that could cause it to move in a new direction. And so I believe as trainers, we empower, we inspire, we equip not just for people to be better at their jobs, but to be better at their lives. And I wish each of you the best. I want to challenge you to add value and make a difference. And I hope to see you again soon. And so with that, I'll say God bless, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Everyone will get a copy of the recording of today's webinar. And also a reminder, I've just watching the chat, if anyone has missed any of the resources, just reply to the email that you get, and we'll make sure you get everything that you'd like. So thanks, everybody.
Okay.